Good.
recently. Welcome to Aural Hygiene. This is the podcast where we look at educational, experimental caught films, the stranger end of documentaries. This is Matt. With me today is a man who has his own podcast that's Macroaggressions and recently has the book out, The Controlled Demolition of the American Empire. Hello, Charlie Robinson.
Hello.
And
Good to see
thanks
you
for
again.
Yeah. Thanks for joining today. Today we, of course, had a look at Monsanto's House of the Future from 1957. This being the vintage specific film. You can find other things made later that probably give you more information and more, a slicker presentation. But we're going for feel here. So,
Yeah.
uh, Charlie, like I asked you, could you give us that 4 or 5, summary of what we just watched?
Well, what we watched, it's what's funny is that to me, Monsanto is always like a poison company. So I never really thought of them as a plastics company. And yet here what they are building this this house of the future in Tomorrowland in Disneyland, this, weird kind of, well, I guess at the time it must have been very Jetsons-esque in their presentation. Everything's going to be so strange, and look at all these features, and a lot of it got incorporated into our way of life now, and so it's really not as strange. You know, Tomorrowland at Disneyland was always, showing the futuristic side, but they didn't really update it for a whole long time. So I remember when I was a kid going there, I would think, the future kind of sucks. It looks kind of weird. It's not really built out very well. And I get it. They're trying to do some, Space Mountain look kind of funky, but the Monsanto House of the Future kind of just, if I had to summarize it in one sentence, it is the future in the future, everything will be made out of plastic, and so that is both terrifying and pretty unsustainable. Of course, now we're in this sort of green new world, and when you look back on that, you think, oh, I mean, when I look at that, I go, oh, I wonder how much that plastic was off gassing for for the first 20 years of its existence there, and probably not the healthiest environment for people to be raised in, but all in all, I mean, not the worst thing Monsanto's ever done. God knows their list of horrible things is fairly long. This house was a little on the mild side by comparison. I mean, when your claim to fame is, Agent Orange, then really anything other than that is kind of a step in the right direction. So I wasn't as horrified with this house as I thought I was going to be. I mean, I'm no fan of Monsanto. We know that, but it was kind of a, it kind of had a little Jetsons feel to it. I could what it actually reminded me of. I'm a real estate agent. I run a real estate brokerage, and I saw a house that came on the market. They hired me to be the listing agent for it, and it was, I mean, the lady who lived there had been there for 40 years. She just passed away. Her kids were full grown, in their 50s, and they were having to sell the house. And they said, well, we'd like for you to sell it. And I felt like I walked into a time capsule that was kind of like that Monsanto House of the Future, like orange countertops, green carpet. I was kind of impressed with the fact that they kept the carpet as it looked as good as it did, because it had to have been the original carpet. It was an unsellable house in every way you could. I mean, it was just the weirdest house I've ever seen. And yet it was modern for the time it was built in 1971. So I would imagine that, if Monsanto had decided to get out of the poison business and into the home building business in the 50s, they might have done pretty well. Who knows?
Maybe. I don't. Of course, this movie didn't have it, but are you aware of the fate of the Monsanto House of the Future? It only ran about 5 years. They closed it.
Yeah, they couldn't get rid of it.
Right.
They had to jackhammer it out piece by piece because it wouldn't come out apparently in.
The wrecking ball would just bounce off.
The wrecking ball bounced off is what they said.
Which
so
that's a metaphor for Monsanto.
I mean, yeah, I mean, I guess there might be something to be said for that being, something built to last. But unfortunately, if you ever want to get rid of it, you couldn't light it on fire and burn it to the ground. I think it would just probably melt and the fumes would kill everybody. But yeah, they had to dismantle it kind of piece by piece, and jackhammer out all of the foundation as well. And then I forget what it went on to be, but it's I think it's something close to like over by where the Matterhorn is. So
Yeah, actually, I've only been to Tokyo and Florida, so I haven't been to the OG Disneyland. And I'll put out here, I mean, there's lots of horrible things to say about Disney too, but yeah, everybody likes going to Disneyland. Well, almost everybody.
right. Yeah, I grew up in Southern California, so that was the place to go. So that Disneyland was the spot, and Tomorrowland was always when you're a little kid and you see that and you think, wow, this is what the future is going to be. Well, I mean, I'm living in the future, and it doesn't look anything like Tomorrowland. I don't see anybody with masks on.
Well, you will if you go to Tomorrowland now.
Yeah. Tomorrowland is Groundhog Day.
Well, the concern was always it was going to be like Todayland. So
yeah,
right. In the 90s, they did update it to like this kind of weird, like cheap Flash Gordon look, which didn't work, and they just occasionally have to change it. Tokyo went with okay, it's just going to be the 70s future forever, which that's great. Cool. I love Logan's Run.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's so there is something kind of nostalgic about that. They should just kept it and then just call it, Yesterday Land or something. But the way they envisioned the future is I guess that they got some things right. They had some of the appliances look kind of like they might fit. The layouts were fairly similar to what we had now, but the fact that almost everything in the house was made out of plastic, I mean, that would be my business partners are interior. One of them is an interior designer. She could do some work with that house. I'm sure she could make it work, but all that plastic and no ceramic or anything like that, I think would make her insane.
I guess people are so much more conscious of that. I recently did a guitar trade. It was like it's basically a new Fender used, so it still had the guide in it. I noticed it had like the there's now like a California toxic materials warning in there, I guess because of the coating you put on a guitar or something. So,
well, I mean, think of how many things we've had in our world that were at the time they were introduced as being safe and the future, and hey, look at this great asbestos that we have. It's the greatest insulation known to man. We'll put it all over your house. And then you're like, oh, everybody's dying from it. Or, hey, would you like to check out this beautiful, freshly lead painted bedroom for your infant? Great. Enjoy the brain damage. So all of these things had kind of rolled out in the name of science or technological upgrades and things like that. Not all of them were fully tested to the best of their abilities, and some of them showed some real glaring weaknesses, like side effects may include brain damage and death, things like that. So I would imagine that if today Monsanto decided to roll out the home of the future, I doubt there would be very many takers interested in going through and walking through that model home.
Well, it depends what incentives they give you. I mean, it's sort of I know in Japan, I think it's Nagoya, has one of those like pilot smart cities, which would be the modern equivalent of this basically. Yeah. Japan's weird though. The population's so much older, like people just aren't interested. So the companies are pushing it, and the older people are like, whatever. We don't even know how to use a fax machine yet.
Right. Yeah. So it just depends on who you're targeting in the for these designs. But I thought the house could have look, I actually kind of like the idea of prefab homes. They make a lot of sense. I work in real estate. I worked in new home sales for 10 years. So I watched them build homes. I sat in on meetings when they were talking about layout and things like that. The idea behind making a home like the Monsanto house of the future, where you could sort of just almost like Legos, put it together piece by piece and build it out. That actually appeals to me. I think there's a lot of upside to doing that. And of course, I'm all for them trying new things and trying, new installations, new concretes, things like aircrete is a new thing that's coming. We're hearing a lot about out here, where it's stronger than concrete. It's not as heavy. It's not as, it doesn't require the same elements. And, so the idea that you would take a scientific approach to home building isn't inherently evil. It's just modernization. But when you put Monsanto's name on it, oh, I mean, it's just
That's the first name, yeah.
God, it's the worst branding ever. I mean, and so, but now, of course, Monsanto isn't there. They've merged with Bayer. So now you have that company, which has an equally disturbing history and a long list of products that have killed people, including, being used to make the Zyklon B in World War II. So maybe not the best people to build houses. That's all. I think that's a fair assessment.
But for this one, actually, they did use the concept when building the I think it's the Contemporary Resort Hotel in Florida, where they did build it modularly. I can't say that. Basically, they built a gigantic A-frame and just started plugging boxes in. So they did use a bit of that idea. And in Japan, I don't know if you're familiar with the capsule hotels, kind of a
no.
Oh, this is if you want to go to somewhere that feels like Monsanto, yeah. And for the listener or yourself, later have a look at an image of this, which is sort of basically drunken businessmen who don't want to show up at home like at 2 a.m. drunk. So these are in Tokyo, and most of them were built in the 60s or 70s. And you go in, and it's like two rows stacked on top of each other, these capsules. So you get in, it's a bed. You probably maybe have a meter of space above you. There's a TV in there and a few they're all modular and a few switches and stuff. And it's pretty weird.
I have seen those. I was wondering if that's what you were talking about. Yeah, that's like, well, are you tired of passing out on the train on the way home? Let us offer you this. You can stay here tonight and not have an embarrassing situation where you wake up at the middle of the night and you're still drunk on a train.
Oh, you'll get embarrassing situations from the other drunken patrons.
Right. That's funny. The fact that there is a market for that is equally alarming, right? that someone was like, what would be good? Basically, like a little bigger than a coffin with some lights, a blanket, and a TV, and you can get as hammered as you want. As long as you can find your way to one of these places, you'll be good for the night. I mean, I envision with Agenda 2030 that the United Nations would love to take that concept and expand it out and have us all sleeping in those little tubes at some point.
I keep thinking of the Fifth Element apartment. That's my vision of that future.
Yeah, exactly. You'll own nothing and like it. You'll be in a micro apartment,
and you're instantly getting credited for driving infractions.
Yeah. You'll own nothing and like it. Yeah, great. I can't wait for this dystopian hellscape.
But you can fly right by a massive golden arches. So.
Oh yeah, of course.
No, we had some fun getting into that one. So,
yeah.
Just another thing. I live in the countryside of Japan, so myself, most of my students, like, what'd you do this weekend? I went to my grandma's house. There's always like the family house up in the mountainside, which is the complete opposite of this. Right. Everything wooden. It's the tatami, all that sort of stuff. So Tokyo, you do get that a lot more of that hi-fi aesthetic, but they still like building things out of wood out here, so that's nice.
Yeah, well, building things out of plastic. I mean, it depends. I suppose it depends on the type of plastic, but it can look a little cheap. You can feel like you're sleeping or living in a Tupperware container or something. That maybe not the best from an aesthetic standpoint. Now, as far as like how long that house could have lasted if it was just left there in Disneyland, I wonder, because since the wrecking ball couldn't take it down, and the climate's relatively mild in Southern California, that thing might still be there if they didn't jackhammer it out.
I wonder if they'd get like biological hazards on it, and not even Monsanto ones, right? I was thinking because they have a lot of trouble with spacecraft keeping like the mildew or the some
Mhm.
kind of fungus from growing. So I just wonder if that much plastic would sit there and become some weird biohazard as well.
Well, if it did, then Monsanto would find a way to use that and sell the biohazard to farmers or other peoples that they can use to poison the world. Because as I've feel rightly described, Monsanto is not in the seed business. Uh, they're in the poison business. I mean, that's what they've always made. Their glyphosate is poisonous, DDT is poisonous. Um, uh, Agent Orange is poisonous. I mean, they're not in the chemical business necessarily. They're more closely aligned with being a company that makes new and inventive ways to kill things with their
Right.
products.
Once their product gets on you, is it the small print says Monsanto owns you if you live in their house? You've been covered by their plastic
Yeah.
materials now.
Uh-huh. Well, they own, like, if you're planting regular crops, if you have a farm with regular corn, and the farmer down the street plants his corn with Monsanto GMO seeds, and the GMO corn grows up and eventually over time spreads to the existing field, Monsanto will claim ownership of that field because they will say that you're growing their corn without without, you didn't buy the seeds, their patent, and they will try to claim ownership of your field. It's really devious, and they've done this to they did it in India, to the point where there's been, I think, God, I know this number sounds wrong, but I think hundreds of thousands of suicides of farmers from Monsanto enforcing their seed patents and making these farmers so despondent that they have nothing left. I know that number sounds insane, and I'm pretty sure it's right, even though it's crazy, because I remember reading something like 250,000 Indian farmers have killed themselves because of it. Don't hold me to it. Someone can fact check me on that. But the point is that you can't own a natural corn seed patent. So Monsanto changes the seed just a little bit, just enough so that it's not natural anymore. Then they take ownership of that. And if you run, if you ever grow their corn, you can't. They're made with what they call terminator seeds that don't work season after season. Normally, if you grow corn or any sort of fruit or vegetable, the vegetable will produce more seeds that you can then replant and keep this thing going and growing. And with Monsanto, you have to buy new seeds every year. So that's part of their business model, which is a sort of functional obsolescence of the seeds, and then a hardcore psychopathic legal protection racket that just goes after anybody that is accidentally, I mean, you don't have to intentionally be growing their stuff. It could just blow by the wind into your place and start growing, and they will go after you. You will get sued. So they are a monstrous corporation that is just truly disgusting when they're
Something
not building
when
futuristic houses, of course.
I first came to Japan, I think 2004, and that's when TPP was like a really on the table, right? The
Yeah.
Trans-Pacific Partnership, and as a 25, very like straight up. I mean, I'm still relatively. I think I'm liberal, but just like everything's cool, right? So, and there's a lot of pushback on TPP. I thought that was weird, but then I did learn like that was one of the big concerns that Japanese farmers were like, well, we've had this these strains of rice seeds for like thousands of years. We don't really want to bring other stuff in.
Yeah, they're smart to do that too, because the Philippines didn't do that. They allowed golden rice in, and it decimated their whole rice production facility. I mean, first of all, it never produces the sort of yields that they say it's going to. And I'm no farmer, but I mean, just I'm just a guy that's written about Monsanto. It never produces to the extent that they say it's going to, and it's not real food. I mean, it's fake food. It's not nutritious. And they did the same thing with the Filipino farmers. They just went in there and strictly enforced these patents. And the people said, we don't want this. We don't want. I think Russia has said, was it Russia or China? One of those two. I think China had a boatload of GMO food came over, and then on the docks they just burned it all. And I know that Russia has banned GMOs from their country as well. So it's not like they're safe, because they're not. When they did the GMO testing on rats, they found that half of the rats that they gave the GMO crops to developed massive tumors and wound up dying. That was not good. It's almost the same story as when they developed, or when GD Searle, that company, developed aspartame. Same thing kind of happened. And yet, if you know the right people in government, you can get these things passed through and brought to market, even if they're poisonous and killing the test subjects, because we live here in the United States in some weird I don't know, corporatist state where big business runs the show. And if you've got a big business with a lot of money and politicians in your pocket, then you can basically do whatever you want.
Didn't the aspartame finally go through with a change in director? I can't bring up the names, but someone that was quite more open to that idea, or
yeah,
to the
well,
money that would flow.
they tried for almost a decade to get aspartame passed. They did so many. I mean, it was the studies were so horrible that it was in that case. I remember that half the rats died from it, and they started faking the tests, and they were getting caught by the FDA, and the FDA was saying, not only are we not approving this, we're one step away from putting all of you people in prison for this. And they kept trying over and over again. They couldn't get this thing approved. They never gave up. Instead, they went out and hired Donald Rumsfeld to be their CEO. And once Donald Rumsfeld became CEO, it magically got passed through. And he put $11.5 million in his pocket for that. And then it went into Diet Coke, and then it went into everything. And I drank Diet Coke for a long, long time. I quit drinking it about 10 years ago, but I would get massive headaches from it. I'd be like, God, I think I drank too. And then I read the story of, the history of it. And I thought, what am I doing? I got to find something else. So I quit drinking it, and my headaches went away. Imagine that. I'm sure I'll probably have tumors like the rats did, and I'm sure Donald Rumsfeld won't care. But that's the big agri companies, these chemical companies, they have so much influence and so much power that you would think, oh, this is insanity. We can't allow any of this stuff to happen. They'll never, they would never approve this, right? If the tests come in and show how dangerous it is, they would never approve it. That's what we have the FDA for, right? They regulate this stuff. No. None of that stuff matters. If you know the right people, or if you have Donald Rumsfeld as your CEO, who, by the way, what does he know about running a chemical company? He was the Secretary of Defense. Of course, you don't need to know anything about it. You just need to know the right people. So he was brought in for his Rolodex, and of course it worked. So in the end, they won, right? Kind of disgusting.
Yeah. Just going back to Monsanto, that's why the branding works now, because they've changed with Bayer. They've changed the name of that division as well, and I can't remember for my life what it is now, like Riviera or something.
They can change these names, and they do, as much as they'd like. But people know who they are, and the word gets out, and but in the end, people just see Roundup. They go, oh, Roundup, it kills weeds and everything. Monsanto has their name on it, but not in big bold letters, because they have such a horrible reputation here in the States. But they make billions of dollars from that. And I think that people, some of us know about it, and some of us have a moral hesitation to use products made by companies like that. But in the end, it's kind of hard to do that. It's kind of hard to completely get away from that, because so many people don't care or don't know. They don't hear about it on their nightly news. They don't know what's happening. They don't hear about the glyphosate, which is the main active ingredient in Roundup that's causing so many problems. They don't hear necessarily about the massive lawsuit that was settled in favor of this this gentleman that won like I think he won $250 million in damages, which is great, but he'll be dead in a year. I mean, he's got massive cancers all over him from inhaling this stuff. But the only time Americans really ever hear about stuff like that is far after the fact, when you turn on daytime television and the commercials are from lawyer groups saying, "Have you been damaged by asbestos? Please call our hotline for our class action lawsuit, blah 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 blah. Do you have mesothelioma? Oh, it's might be from this drug, or do you have, you name it." So we're just starting to hear about, I'm just starting to see the commercials for, "Were you injured by glyphosate? Please join our class action lawsuit." So, eventually, after they've made billions of dollars, they may wind up in some lawsuit where their product gets brought to the forefront, and thousands of people sue them for a couple $1 billion. But in the end, it's just a cost analysis. They go, well, how much does it cost to settle this? How much did we make on it? How many fines do we have to pay? It still worked out really well for us in the long term. Our stock has tripled over the years, so who cares? So there's really no financial disincentive for these companies, because and it's the same with the big banks too. You make $100 billion running some scam rigging marketplaces, and then you pay a $2 billion fine. Really? I mean, why wouldn't you continue doing that? Look at how much money you made from it. So companies like Monsanto, Bayer, all the big banks, these institutions and industries that have really horrible reputations, they all are extremely profitable too. So they don't necessarily care so much that they have a stigma attached to their name. If it becomes too big of a problem, just change your name. Easy.
Of course, with the House of the Future, that's when they were trying to do a PR campaign to make their name sound great. And I don't know if you ran across these. They did have a couple other attractions. One of them has the very nefarious sounding name of the Monsanto Hall of Chemistry.
Oh yeah.
So that's fun. Hall, yeah, double checking there.
Yeah, because what do kids love when they go to an amusement park? The Hall of Chemistry, right? Who would go to that? That's like that's where you go when the Matterhorn has a 3-hour line. You go, whoa, where are we going? Let's go to the Hall of Chemistry. Actually, back then, it wasn't pay your ticket to get in Disneyland and you can go to all the rides. It was, you had to get different tickets for different rides. There was like E-ticket rides and B-ticket rides and things like that. So if you wanted to go to like the Monsanto House of the Future, something tells me that was the cheapest ticket to buy to get into that, because really, like, do kids want to see the House of the Future? Probably something that the parents might do while the kids were at Space Mountain or something. But the Hall of Chemistry sounds, frankly, it sounds quite boring at Disneyland.
Yeah,
I mean, the arcade is right next door. By the way, the way everything was laid out in Tomorrowland, the arcade, I don't know if it was there at the time, but right now, the arcade's right there. So it's like, would you like to go to the arcade, or would you like to go to the Hall of Chemistry brought to you by Monsanto? Gee, let me think.
That one was an opening attraction. I think it was basically they built the thing so fast they couldn't actually plan everything properly, so they had to rush it. But hey, Monsanto's got your back. 10 years after this one, in the 60s, they had the Adventure Through Inner Space. Still had their name on the sign, but they at least kept it out of the name that time. And one of the big things there is it didn't require a ticket, I believe. So,
oh, nice.
They really wanted you to hear their name at that time. That would have been 1967, right when Agent Orange was starting to make itself known. So it's like, hey, quick, give them a free ride.
Yeah. Well, we're going to simulate Vietnam. What we're going to do is we're going to have you guys sit in these virtual rice paddies, and we're going to come over and spray you with this, it'll just be water at Disneyland, but just pretend like it's Agent Orange, and then pretend like 10 years later, when you have kids, your kids are completely deformed. Enjoy that. That's
the Soarin' attraction.
Right.
they have you going over a vineyard, and they're pumping in like the smell of orange. So
right.
Probably literally doing that.
look, we're defoliating all of these trees so that we can see the gooks. You're like, what? That's like back then, that's how it was. I mean, it's a really, you know, we joke about it because it's so preposterous, really. But like it takes a really sick mind to come up with the idea of, we're losing this, or we're in this battle in Vietnam, and the North Vietnamese are in the trees and it's hard to see because there's trees everywhere. So let's find a chemical that will make all the leaves fall out of the trees so that we can see everybody and then shoot them. I mean, you have to be psychopathic and just an enemy of humanity to come up with something like that. And yet, here we are. And that is something that left millions of people, multi-generational birth defects from that sort of stuff. It's just the most reprehensible thing ever. For what the United States did to Vietnam is unforgivable, and to take it a step further, then later in Iraq, using depleted uranium, I mean, that I think Monsanto was probably frustrated that they didn't come up with the idea of depleted uranium first. I mean, someone beat them to the punch, because that seems like something that would have been right up their alley. But to see those pictures of what Agent Orange did, not just to, to American soldiers too, a lot of people suffering from those illnesses when they got back. The Army was never forthright with how dangerous that stuff was. And, the government, of course, just goes, oh, well, we didn't know. Yeah, of course you knew. Everybody knows. You know when you're spraying this stuff. I mean, and it comes out in like a gigantic orange fog you can see. And that is, it's just unforgivable what we did to the people of Vietnam in the name of saving them from communism by what? Giving them birth defects? Oh,
And
you're
bullets.
welcome.
Yeah, I was sitting here thinking, like, yeah, and all of those reprehensible decisions are, after the event of war. Oh, sorry, a police action. That wasn't a war.
Police action, right?
But yeah, it's like, okay, we got the basic problem here. What I guess that's once we're, murdering each other and it's okay because it's a war, now we can start doing some more horrible stuff. So
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you allow the government, especially the American government, to talk you into a war, they will it will always end with atrocities. And we've got that picture in our heads or that image that's kind of burned into everybody's brains of the naked girl in Vietnam running down the street, screaming, as you can see the village behind just, like on fire. I mean, what have we become, as a nation, as a society? Like, what I get it that the soldiers didn't have a say in this. You get shipped off and it's not their idea to be there, but it was somebody's idea to be there. And it all started from a fake, a false flag, not even a real event. The Gulf of Tonkin event, the ship being shot at by a Vietnamese PT boat, which never happened. And that was the pretext that then started this war that killed millions of people, killed almost 60,000 American service people. It
and the
just
doors.
atrocious.
Yeah, it still blows my mind. That's Jim Morrison's daddy was the commander of that particular
Yeah. Yeah. That
operation.
boat.
That's wild. So
Yeah, I met a guy named Mark Devlin. He's a British DJ who's written a couple books called Musical Truths Volume 1 and 2. We were speakers at an Acapulco, and I watched his presentation on rock stars and their CIA/military connected parents. Man, because he's talking about Jim Morrison and his dad. He's talking about the police, all the members of the police, Stuart Copeland, and their parents' ties to MI6 and MI5, and all. I mean, he had 30 minutes, but he could have gone for 4 hours, and it was really fascinating. So much of what we think is organic and real is not. So many of these people that we think are like accidental rock stars or not, they're sort of placed there. And to hear him talking about the Gulf of Tonkin incident and have Admiral Morrison being involved in that, Jim Morrison's dad, you just go, whoa, is that a coincidence? And it might be a coincidence until you string 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 of these people together, and you go, I don't think it's a coincidence anymore. I think there might be something, a little bit more of this planning to it. So it's very, very disturbing.
Have you seen the Once Upon a Time in Hollywood film that touches on the Laurel
Yeah.
Canyon scene and the Manson scene and all that?
Yeah.
To the point where it's like it just assumes you already know this stuff. If you don't know it, it's a pretty confusing movie.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, if you don't know what's going on, then you're like, none of the characters make sense. None of the, where this house is doesn't make sense. But yeah, that's Dave McGowan wrote a book about that was really sort of exposed that Laurel Canyon Hollywood hippie scene. And I lived in LA for a long, long time, went to USC, and I know that area pretty well. It must have been an interesting, fascinating time to be there. You get the Beach Boys and all kinds of Crosby, Stills, Nash, all coming together, and the Eagles and the Doors. And I mean, what a crazy, fascinating time to be in LA. But then once you dig into it and you find out how dirty all that stuff is, makes you think, like, exactly how much of this was organic and how much of this was made to happen. And I don't know. It's just an interesting interesting take. I thought Quentin Tarantino did, he did his thing. He made it gory at the end, in a way that only he can. But yeah, looking back on all that, the 60s Hollywood, man, what a trip, huh? I wonder what they would have thought of Monsanto's House of the Future.
Oh, they would have been tripping. It would have been awesome.
Yeah, no shit.
And
yeah, they would have been.
The adventure through inner space. My God, that was like the trippiest ride ever.
It made you super small in the end. Like you come out and you're like, whoa, look at everybody's so small. Yeah.
Apparently the Omni movies were curved. It was also like the makeout spot.
Yeah. It was like if Honey, I Shrunk the Kids was a ride, it was that. But that was a long, I totally forgot about that until I started watching the documentary on the Monsanto house. I was like, oh yeah, I remember that. I remember it was a long time ago, and I think it's since been replaced by,
I think it's Star Tours.
Oh yeah, it's Star Tours now. Yeah. It's in that same spot,
but
which is great. Star Tours is fantastic. Way better than that lame Monsanto.
Unless you want to make out in their plastic Omni mover.
hard to do that in Star Tours unless you want to like chip a tooth or something. There's a lot of gyrations and tilting of the floor in that Star Tours ride.
Yeah. Just speaking of frames of mind, one other movie I just wanted to bring up was The Monkey's Head. I don't know if you've seen this one. It's a very obscure one, and it was made after their TV show, so their career was kind of like iffy at this point after they had been, like the Laurel Canyon Pretty Boys for a few years, like on top of, I mean, as far as status, that maybe musically people are like, whatever, the Monkeys, but as far as Laurel Canyon royalty, they're doing quite well. So they make this movie. It's just like this surreal series of skits that are barely connected, but it's kind of the movie starts with Mickey Dolenz like running off a bridge and like jumping off and becoming a porpoise. And then, and it just goes from there. But throughout the movie, like there's all these weird sketches, like an acid trip, and they keep getting put back into this like metaphysical box, like this black space, which is this box that they just keep getting put into. So, when you are familiar with the scene and you watch it, you're like, okay, this is fascinating.
That's funny. There must have been a lot of drugs involved in that. But when they have the bands and they try to make movies out of them, I mean, when they've got not movies about bands, but I mean movies starring bands like Kiss in Central Park, like that was pretty dumb. I mean,
the most important thing with The Monkey's Head, written by Jack Nicholson.
Really?
Yeah. So apparently they went out to like a motel with him and all dropped acid, and he wrote the movie with them. So
wow. Didn't get an Academy Award for that.
They did not get an Academy Award for it, but it's definitely a fascinating. That's one that would be be doing on this podcast at some point. It's weird enough to count as experimental. So
Yeah, that's crazy. I didn't the only time I remember them, I just remember the monkey show with them like running with this bed that had wheels on it, right, pushing it down the street. I just remember that thinking, this is unusual. This is weird. But it was a little bit before my time musically. But yeah, I remember who they were. They were a big, apparently quite a big deal. I mean, big enough that they had TV shows and movies. I mean, who greenlights that movie, right? Some
that's why it ended their career.
right. Yeah, there you go. Whoever greenlit the movie, it probably ended their career too. That's funny. We have to see. I have to see that, but I would have to be in the right mood to see that movie,
Yeah,
if you know
sure.
what I mean. Grab a bag of mushrooms and enjoy that thing.
That's probably not the worst idea.
Yeah.
And oh yeah, it's Colorado too. It's not so hard. See, Japan, that doesn't happen here. That's the price you pay living in Japan.
Yeah. Well, here it just got decriminalized.
Right, I know.
Yeah. So
Actually,
we can do it. I actually know some guys that are growing
yeah.
them.
Actually, Japan, it did not become illegal till about 2003, I think.
Oh yeah.
And that was because of the World Cup. So one of my friends, he started living in Japan like 99. So he was, legally bouncing around town for a couple of years, and the World Cup came and ended the trip, literally.
Wow. The World Cup. I don't normally think of the World Cup as being a mushrooms adjacent.
No, it's because they had such an international crowd coming. They wanted to like save face. They were afraid Americans would come and be like judgmental because it was, still legal. Like they were worried about the international visitors, which I guess they don't have to worry about for this Olympics.
Right. They just said international visitors for this coming Olympics, stay home. We don't want you.
Yeah, the politics here with that are so weird because Japan's just bent on it. I think there's so much political face riding on having the Olympics now. Like,
yeah.
They just are going to do it hell or high water. So,
well, did they spend? I mean, like most cities that host the Olympics wind up building out all this infrastructure, and it never like pays itself off. It never works. Did Japan need to build a ton of infrastructure for that?
There's a whole book you can look up about that sort of thing called Dogs and Demons. I forget the author, but this is the 80s and 90s. Sorry, this is not modern, but when Japan had their bubble period, they just had tons of money, and they just went building these giant concrete, like brutalist structures everywhere, and just massive highways. So like even a small town tends to have like this rather large auditorium. Which but before COVID I was playing orchestras, so that was nice because we always had nice places to play. But they just spent all this money building public structures, and for the Olympics, of course they spent a ton of money on that. I was reading the national government can probably like flow with it, but I was reading an article yesterday in the Japan Today, I think, where a bunch of towns, apparently towns will host an Olympic team. Like if you're the Rwandan swimming team, like a town will be like, come here, hang out. And it was talking about what towns are doing. So one town had spent $5 million up, small town, you spent $5 million or 500 million yen. I forget exactly how that, $50 million. Anyway, the point is they spent a bunch of money building infrastructure, making their sports centers better, and no one's coming now.
Well,
a town not far from me, there, I don't think they'd spend that kind of money, but they're just like, well, we're just going to put up, posters of this particular tennis team all around town that was supposed to be here.
Go team.
Yeah, right? Yeah.
Then does that town is supposed to sort of embrace this foreign country's tennis team? Is that it? Is that the
right? The team was before the Olympics. The team was supposed to be able to like kind of come out there, train. Actually, about 10 kilometers from here is Sugadaira, which is like rugby central. Like all the rugby teams were going to go there, or like half of them probably. But yeah, so I know they're eating it right now because they would have been expecting a lot of tourists and foreign visitors from the Olympic teams. So I just hope the hamburger shop makes it through because it's the best hamburger around.
Yeah, the Olympics are always they at least in the States, as you're from Atlanta, is that right?
Yes, I was. Oh, I didn't even realize Eastwood made a movie about Richard Jewell because I had been at Centennial Park watching a concert at that pylon, and about
Hmm.
the time I was getting on the train is when the bomb went off. So
No kidding.
if I'd stayed there 30 minutes later, I think one person died, so I guess I might not get killed, but hey, could have gotten an injury, and it certainly would have been a bit of a trauma.
Wow,
Yeah,
that's crazy.
it was Santana or Brian Setzer that was playing just before that. I don't remember which. They had a lot of free concerts up to that point. They didn't
Yeah.
after that.
Yeah, after that, funny things changed. Yeah, I remember watching that. I remember watching that. I was living in Hermosa Beach, watching that. Go, oh, a bomb in the Olympics. That's crazy.
Like
Uh,
personally, hey, maybe that might be the point where, I guess people usually are like Patriot 9/11's like where the security state really kicks in. But for me, I was like having a nice freewheeling time at the Olympics, and after that, it was very crackdown. So
yeah,
you couldn't just stroll around and have fun anymore.
yeah, yeah. Well, the any of those events, like the Olympics, the World Cup, things like that, you get enough people together. uh, if somebody wants to make a statement, some government wants to set off some false flag, it's always it's like having an international stage because every country will report on it. And I always get a little uncomfortable when I'm around major events like that, or major, sporting events like that.
Yeah.
I worked in sports for a long, long time, and so we would go to all these big events, and it always made me a little uneasy because it's just such a prime target for anybody doing something stupid to really get a whole lot of notoriety on a international level. So
Just to tie the circle a little more, the IOC was actually quite unhappy with Atlanta's handling of the Olympics because it was so corporate. like
ah
behind that stage, they basically had built like a little mini corporate World's Fair, like these two giant tents. And yeah,
mm,
I remember there's a big, because the head like is always supposed to say like this is the best Olympics ever, and he did not say that for Atlanta, which was seen as like a giant snub.
wow.
So, but hey, I had a good time there till the bombs went off.
Yeah, it's always a good time until the bombs go off. But then when the bombs go off, it's time to go home. That's crazy that you made it out of there in just in advance of that. Were you a suspect for leaving
Oh,
30 minutes early?
oh no, no, I was a high schooler with high schooler kids. They were not really pegging us. I don't know.
Like,
I guess
where were you?
yeah, you get some high schoolers up to no good.
Now these days they'd be like, well, your cell phone showed that you were there and then you left a little early, so we want to question you about why did you have advanced knowledge of this? Like, no, just lucky.
I would have given them bad report anyway, but I've only had to give the report to the police once because we basically saw playing a gig and a cop wiped out because someone made a turn and we had to give a statement. And apparently my statement was so crap they never talked to me again. A friend that I got the name of the street wrong and several other things. my
Yeah.
other my other friend gave a good statement and he had to come back in to answer questions for the next like 2 years.
Oh, yeah, that's a lesson to everybody. Be like, yeah, yeah. Did you see the suspect? Yeah, he was kind of tall, well, or maybe he was kind of short. I mean, he was kind of dark complexion in some parts, but light complexion. They're like, get out of here. My mom did that. My mom said that she was brought in for jury duty, and they were asking her questions. Would you say that they were asking yes or no questions, and she was being intentionally indecisive. She would say, "Oh yes, well, I don't know, no, no, I don't know." And they're like, "Get her out of here! This is gonna. We don't want this lady. She can't make up her mind on anything." She's like, "That's how you get out of jury duty." I was like, "Oh, interesting.
All
Didn't
right,
think
on.
about that."
I think I never actually made it all the way to the courthouse for that. That's nice.
Yeah,
I always get, we got too many people today. Just stay home. Okay.
yeah, I've had that a couple times too. They're like, "Oh, I did." They brought me in for potential jury duty, to go through the whole thing. They said, "Now, this case is going to be for a triple murder, and you're probably going to be needed for the next, I mean, honestly, at least 2 months." I was like, "I'm self-employed. I can't do this." And they're like, "Oh, okay, well then you're out." I was like, "That's it? That's
Oh,
all I had to
great.
say?" And they're like, "Yeah, you're out. If you're self-employed and you can't," I go, "Okay, bye." There, and that was it. So it's not exactly the most rigorous system I've ever seen.
Right.
How do we get on this topic?
I don't know. It's fine. We're all into tangents. It's cool. But I probably should wind it down since I often have in the morning. I time this. I give myself an hour and then I run for the train and I go to work. So
Yeah. Well,
so
it's look. I mean, I always if we have great talks. I know that you had Ken Ami on
yeah, twice.
twice. He's great, man. He's I've had him on my show, and then
I
I
think
have
that's where I heard him, to be honest, and
a
then
group
emailed him from
show.
that.
I think I
So
might have told you about him too. Yeah, he's written a bunch of crazy books, man. He's into he can give you a good movie breakdown. He actually had me write a breakdown for his book. He wanted me to do a take a movie that deals with aliens and do a chapter for his book. So I picked the movie Contact, which is the only alien movie that has no aliens in it.
yeah.
And
Actually, it was sitting right behind me here.
yeah, and I did a full breakdown for him and sent it off. So I don't know if that book has come out yet or not, but I was obviously flattered that he asked me to do that, and I thought it was funny because the movie I picked as I watched it and then I watched it again. I had seen it before, but as I watched it the second time, I was like, no actual aliens in this one, just the idea of aliens. So I am doing a book report essentially about aliens on a movie about aliens that doesn't ever show one. And he was like, that's perfect. He's like, I like it. That's crazy, but it works. So
The South Park line at the time was it? Waited through the whole movie. It was just your dad at the end. I don't remember exactly. I think the line was actually more obscene than that, but I don't remember what it was. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, we traumatized him a little bit by making him watch A Clockwork Orange again. So
Oh, did you?
yeah.
Oh, that's a good one.
But yeah. But yeah, I actually your new book, I'm a fast reader, but yeah, it takes me about 5 months to work through your books because you do have to put them down sometimes.
You got it. Yeah, they're a bit heavy duty.
But if I could
Sometimes.
give you your plug spot for that and where people can get into that
Oh,
stuff in your
sure. Yeah,
podcast.
I got it right here. The controlled demolition of the American Empire. I wrote this with Jeff Berwick, the founder of the Dollar Vigilante and Anarchapulco. And that came out the Friday before the elections here in the States. And on Tuesday, which was election day, it became a #1 bestseller. And the irony that if you read this book, you'll never vote again, that it happened on election day. Jeff and I were like, it's perfect. It's perfect that the timing was such. So people can find that on Amazon. They can find The Octopus of Global Control on Amazon, as well as at my website of the same name, theoctopusofglobalcontrol.com. And the podcast is Macroaggressions. It's available wherever podcasts are served and also in video format in places like Rockfin and David Icke's video platform Iconic, YouTube, and Odyssey.
You got it so much more down than I do. I stutter through this. So this podcast is Aural Hygiene Pod at Twitter or Facebook. And if you're listening to it wherever you get your podcast, I talk sci-fi movies with my buddy Luke at Matt and Luke's Sci-Fi Sanctuary, which is MLSF Pod at Twitter, Facebook, and the like. And that's all these podcasts are wrapped up under some side of name now, but I only see the first part of the name. It's Podcastio Podcastius, I think. It's like the page will not show me the end of the word. So yeah.
Well, I appreciate you having me on, and I always enjoy our conversations. We get into some
coming again. And yeah, if you do have a weird educational film or something you want to dig into, sure. Because I mean, Monsanto, of course, it's fun to rag on them, but it's beating a dead horse a little bit. But it's a pretty fun dead horse to beat on them from time to time because they're so deserving of it. So
of course, yeah, they really are one of the worst companies in the world, and for those that don't know it, now you know.
okay, so everyone stay away from those horrible plastic chemicals and that giant island of plastic in the center of the Pacific.
Yes. Yep.